Welcome to the latest episode in the Paradise Talks pod series, where we offer insider insights on the creative industries. Our focus today is festivals. I'm your host, Emma Bartholomew. To say that this has been a difficult or unprecedented year for the festival community would be a cliche understatement. It doesn't come close to describing the stress or chaos that the pandemic has impacted on the sector. We've now moved into a period beyond a full year in which organisers, promoters, crews and artists alike are grappling with more uncertainty than we've ever encountered. As this podcast is brought to you by Paradise, the agency for entertaining brands, we can't expect or pretend to solve the mountain of issues facing the festival sector as we record this episode. From the daily cancellations to debates around COVID passports and the lack of government-backed insurance. But what we can do is to explore with hope the resourcefulness, creativity, innovation and bravery, frankly, of those operating in the festival industry as they approach solutions around planning and maintaining the conversation with their audiences, keeping their brands relevant and alive in these strange times. Through our conversation, we'll ask, is it possible for festivals to plan, promote, and keep their audiences engaged and hopeful on shifting sands? Joining me today are my expert guests, who I'm very lucky to be joined by. Biff Mitchell has vast experience in the festival industry, from promotion and stage management to event conception, organisation and production across festivals including Beautiful Days, Mucky Weekender and Glastonbury. Lou Jennings is an advisory board member at Paradise, producers of this pod. She has a wealth of experience in the travel events, festival and adventure space. And Paul Reed is CEO of the AIF, the Association of Independent Festivals, which counts more than 80 festivals amongst its members, an organisation that has been lobbying tirelessly on behalf of its membership around vital issues such as insurance. Thank you all. That is a heartfelt thanks for taking the time to be here during one of the most hectic periods you must all have been through. Welcome to Paradise Talks. Now, I want to ask a really genuine human question before we get into more technical details about planning and promotion. Paul, I'm going to start with you. On a human level, how on earth are the festival community doing after the year we've had?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Emma, and I think you summarised it very eloquently in your introduction there. Obviously, the effects of this pandemic, this crisis, have been far-reaching and profound. You know, festivals are a rather strange part of the economy in some respects, in that they have a very limited window in which to generate income and stage their events, sell tickets, etc. Obviously, we were shuttered for an entire year last year, and that had a devastating effect on many. There were many festival organisers. I think the average across our membership, people had £375,000 worth of sunk costs on average at that point, and 98.5% of them were not covered by any sort of COVID cancellation, communicable disease insurance coverage. So yeah, devastating financially and professionally, but yeah, I think on a human level as well, particularly is the mood is particularly mixed out there, I would say. So on the one hand, there is cause for some more cautious optimism. You know, we have a roadmap, we have a no earlier than date, which is, we were lobbying for many, many months for that. And we have had some government support through the Cultural Recovery Fund. That's reached quite a lot of our members. Certainly things like the VAT reduction and an extension on that as well have been very welcome measures. And we do have a live music pilot this Sunday.
Thanks for that, Paul. I mean, I can't really imagine the day-to-day changes and swings in how everybody must be feeling. But at a time when speculation is rife, we'll have to face the the horrible fact that some much loved names in the festival space may not survive. How do you avoid, I mean, I don't even know if it's possible, but can you avoid chewing the fat and actually move forward with planning that's feasible?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because there's a lot at stake here. For an independent business, to proceed with those upfront costs and incredible amounts of capital. I mean, we found from a member survey, the average cost of staging an AIF member festival is over £6 million. It's a huge gamble, really, to proceed with that without any sort of insurance in place. And obviously, for these businesses, it's not just a question of kind of hibernating and then being able to come back in the autumn. You know, uh, this is it. This is their limited window to stage their event due to the seasonal nature of it. So I think that's really challenging, and I think for many of them, it may not be a question um, of hibernating. It's for seasonal businesses such as festivals. I think that may mean shutting down your operations, laying off your staff, um, possibly going off to do something else. I think there's a real mental health angle to this as well. People in the industry haven't been able to go out and stage events and build things and put on those experiences for people, which is what they love to do. So I think there's quite a lot of concerns there around loss of the skilled workforce, and certainly those that can't happen this year will unquestionably need further financial support to get to next year. We've surveyed members, and 76% of them said that they would need further support if they couldn't stage their event this year. So it's incredibly difficult. Obviously, festivals only want to return when it's absolutely safe to do so. No one wants to miss the opportunity of staging an event safely this year, and it seems that we are progressing in terms of the roadmap of the vaccination rollout. Be very interesting to see what emerges from this pilot on Sunday as well. So no one wants to miss that opportunity. But I think, as Biff was saying, everyone has a cutoff point at which they'll be getting asked for non-refundable deposits. We know that most festival costs do hit around a month out from the event. So, say you've got a festival in early July, you're going to have to pay 40% of your costs by mid-June, which is, let's face it, when we'll have absolute certainty on this. Because we've got the pilot, but the events research program itself is not due to report until mid-May. So those timelines are bearing down on people, really. I think that's where we are. I mean, there are some. It was interesting yesterday just to see that from the pilot events in Spain, there were no signs of infection after the sort of pilot concert that they did, which is very encouraging in terms of being enabling and laying out what the correct mitigations are. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work with government, DCMS, Public Health England. We issued some updated interim guidance for festival organisers to hopefully help with those planning conversations at the moment. Because, again, to just touch upon what Biff was saying, local authorities are in the dark, and there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of different risk appetites as well, and festivals are needing to meet now with their safety advisory groups to map out the event and how they're going to approach COVID. So yeah, it really does feel like it's at a critical time.
Yeah, and I was also feeling slightly positive when I heard that news about the test event in Spain. Let's just hope that Sunday's event can yield similar results. And I guess, I don't know, the mental health question is so tricky because, on the one hand, giving yourself a cutoff point in some ways is some kind of relief of the burden of stress and uncertainty. But on the other hand, there's the stress of running towards that deadline. So, it's just essential, I guess, that everybody's supporting each other within the community at the moment. But Lou, I wanted to ask you something in terms of keeping festival audiences engaged, because on the one hand, for organisers, it must almost be like the last thing that seems to be a priority, because things like are we going to survive would obviously be imperative. But we must keep the audiences engaged, otherwise there is no festival sector. But those audiences are digitally saturated right now. So, how does the festival community keep them engaged and excited to look forward without false hope? Is that possible? Have you seen any strong examples of that, Lou?
Yeah, I think I mean it's so tricky that we have to acknowledge that for everyone, but we have to remember that these audiences feel part of the brand that they've affiliated themselves to, and I think the best way of keeping their engagement and trust is, quite simply to ensure any communications that do go out are very transparent and honest. I think it's the kind of big, fluffy, promise-filled, unrealistic statements that could jeopardize that. And I think, in addition, making sure the actual humans behind the festival brands are speaking directly to the audiences also helps. I mean, I think the benefit of the festival industry has specifically is that by default the customer base tend to be the type of people searching for the best experiences. So, as long as in communications it's clear as to why something isn't happening, or why something is happening in the way it is, or why there is a lack of clarity on a certain point, I think generally their expectations are met or appeased, and they tend to understand. I think also showing well, we've chatted about this before, Emma, but showing an empathetic approach to the current problem is something that I think also keeps the audiences engaged, especially at a time of digital saturation, and where possible, diversifying in a way which very obviously meets the current needs of the customer, rather than trying to be kind of passive or generic. Like, it's much easier said than done, and it's totally it's obvious that it's not always possible due to resource or budgets, or to the mental health point, motivation. But I think for the brands that have been able to show that very strategic diversification, it will pay dividends in the long run, and also build a stronger digital community for them than before. A strong example of this for me would be the guys that I work with over at Love Trails Festival, who have been forced to reevaluate and expand their kind of product offering from the one flagship festival event to a series of digital initiatives and micro event options. And they were based on very well considered strategies of meeting points that the community were currently missing. And I think a good example of that would be the Love Trails Collective, which is an online community support and knowledge tool, and has proved hugely popular. So it's been nice to see that off the back of such hard times, there has been some kind of, a positive response to a product created in a kind of forced fashion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And I think the key things there for me, from what you've just said, are kind of diversifying or adapting, let's say, but within the capacities of us as human beings and as a festival community, to the reality of what the situation that we're facing. But also, I'm a massive fan as a PR bod. I'm a massive fan of human to human communication that is honest and as transparent as possible. And of course, at the moment that can be really, really tough. But yeah, Lou, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just that I think a massive positive that's come from the pandemic has been the more open conversations that are happening between brand to brand, or festival to festival. It feels to me there's just much more of a kind of common sense of like unity and collaboration, and I think if it would be great if that could be maintained going forwards, because I think it will only benefit everybody, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the wider music and entertainment industry, in which we all live in various forms, that the solidarity that's come out of this more than a year now has been one of the most positive things for me. Sense of community. Well, I mean, in our personal lives as much as in our working lives. And there's a lot of crossover, of course, because we're all speaking to each other so often from within our own homes. So we have to be supportive of one another. In terms of being supportive, Paul, I've been thinking a lot about as you mentioned, the mental health, the mental well-being of festival organisers, crews, every single human being that's involved in the festival industry. One thing that I've been thinking as a kind of outsider looking in is the feeling of almost failure, which I would hate festival organisers to feel if they're faced with almost being forced into cancellations. I would much rather festival organisers could think that they are actually surviving with a longer term view to bringing back the festivals that people love, but safely and to something closer to the standard that people expect. We've seen some really heartfelt and honest cancellation announcements from festivals on social media, which is sometimes really heartbreaking as well. Do you think honesty and transparency of messaging when it comes to the communication between the festival organisers and their community of audience and festival goers, are they the biggest priorities when festivals are speaking to their ticket buyers?
Yeah, absolutely, Emma. And I had a meeting with some of our members recently who unfortunately either cancelled or on the verge of cancelling. And one of them said, we don't look at it in terms of having customers. We have a community. That community have been incredibly supportive of us throughout this. They've rolled over tickets, etc. A large part of that has to do with transparency and tone and knowing how to communicate with your audience, which I would say, all of our members know how to do that individually. I think there's a huge demand for events out there. I think we've seen that in, once the roadmap was announced, it was the first point in the pandemic where festivals started selling tickets, and some put out fairly cautious announcements, I have to say. They were not, there's some festivals out there that have been fairly bullish in their comms. But, I saw examples of some statements that more or less saying, we will do our utmost to deliver the festival. The obstacles still remain, but we hope to see you this year. That sort of thing, really. And still sold incredible amounts of tickets, in some instances, 10,000 tickets in one day off the back of fairly cautious statements. So I feel like the roadmap has injected that confidence in this summer, but we could be in a situation whereby if the government don't really intervene on insurance, the summer will end up being fairly empty anyway. I think looking beyond that, I mean, one of our members said to me in a call, we've got to remember that beyond this, there's the next 10, 20 years of independent festivals and AIF and what we're going to do. And we're going to come out of this in a really strong position. So I think it's, very difficult for people, especially if they've already made the decision to postpone to next year. But yeah, I think people are communicating with their audiences clearly and in a transparent way. They've been very upfront about practical issues like refunds. You can roll your ticket over, or if you want a refund, absolutely, there it is. And I think as a result, I mean, it's seen incredible amounts of audience loyalty. This time last year, we were projecting that over 90% of our members were going to collapse due to refund requests. That's this is how concerned people were. Thankfully, that didn't come to pass because audiences rolled over tickets. Festivals subsequently got a bit of financial support. I appreciate that didn't reach everyone, but it has put some in a stable position. But primarily, that didn't come to pass because of that audience loyalty that they've cultivated over many years.
Yeah, I mean, I've also been observing the habits of people to roll over those tickets and to not be demanding their refunds. As you said, I think last year when the audiences were in shock, maybe they were a bit scared and trying to claim refunds left, right, and centre. But just on the insurance question, because I know that this has been such a burning issue for the AIF, your members, the wider industry. Paul, have you seen any activity within the actual festival goer audience side of the community engaging on social media or lending their support to the campaign to get that government-backed insurance? Or is that much more a conversation that happens between the industry and the government through lobbying?
I mean, I think audiences are aware of it due to the extent of media coverage that it's attracted. It's perhaps unlikely that insurance has become a hot potato issue, really, because it can sound a bit granular and a bit technical. But I think audiences get it, really, that the cost of staging a festival, a temporary event, a temporary town or city in a field is absolutely astronomical. And it's a high risk business at the best of times with incredibly tight margins. So I think audiences have a grasp of that issue and the situation quite simply, just to distill it. And we've had, over 6 months of dialogue with government around this. We've presented every shred of data and evidence that they have requested and more. And the situation is seemingly stalled. It's at a bit of an impasse, and it's looking unlikely that they're going to intervene. But when you boil it down to it, it's a market failure within the insurance market. So I think that's an important point to make, because this isn't a failure within the festival market. It's within the insurance market. It's due to the extent of payoffs through business interruption insurance across various sectors that sort of destabilize the market in a way that it'll be unlikely to mobilize until at least next year. So insurers cannot offer a COVID-related cancellation as a result. Now, when you've got a market failure like that, quite simply, it requires government intervention. And there's examples of this in governments across the rest of Europe, Austria, the Netherlands, Estonia. There's an increasingly lengthy list of governments who have realised this and stepped in. And in fact, our own government has intervened in the film and TV production industry to provide a government-backed scheme. So there are ways of doing this. We've modelled it. We've had so many conversations with government around insurance, and I think that audiences, I think also as well, all festivals that are cancelling are mentioning that as an issue, as a factor in the cancellation, if not the main factor. So I think the more audiences see that, they realise, oh, well, that issue is not specific to the festival I'm going to. This is something affecting all of them. And I think that will probably help audiences to digest the news of cancellation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're all learning so much more than we ever realised was involved in all of these elements. So I've got a question for you next, Biff, actually, which is, there are elements, of course, that can be controlled to a certain extent within huge limitations, like cancellation policies and the kind of internal deadlines and cutoff points that you mentioned earlier for decision making. But there's so much that can't be controlled. What can festival organisers be doing as key priorities when it comes to keeping their brands alive in the eyes of a digital audience as things stand? I mean, there's just so much noise out there. Is there stuff that organisers can be doing?
Well, last year at Glastonbury, we put our own Glade line up together and put that out. It was part of the official Glastonbury thing, but we had no sort of real help from Glastonbury. We'd done it off our own backs. That went very well. We haven't done that with any of the other festivals that I work on. I think it's just you're really in the hands of the gods with all this. It's hard to know what people are thinking of the different brands. I mean, people seem to be very, very loyal. We noticed that with the amount of tickets that were that were redeemed after last year, or after the people asked for their money back. We had very few on beautiful days, and probably less than 20-30 unlucky weekender out of 1,000 that have been sold. So, people have seemed to stuck to brand. Brand loyalty seems to be good, but I don't know how long that will last, to be honest.
Yeah, it's such a kind of murky horizon, isn't it? But I mean, I do think that brand loyalty and the support of the audiences is one reassuring thing. Lou, the festival space is one in which Paradise works widely, collaborating closely with a range of festivals. So I just wanted to address a few quick questions to you within your advisory board role. How are you bringing in your own vast experience and understanding to impact how Paradise can support festivals in this period? I mean, it's not so much a kind of agency client relationship as a sort of supportive family relationship from what I can see. Obviously, you need to be supportive in a period of looking to the future with cautious optimism and as much realism as is needed. So, yeah, can you tell me something about your take on that?
Yeah, sure. By the way, Emma, never say quick question to me because I'm not very good at responding to quick questions. So apologies if it's a bit of a long-winded response. But I guess in short, it's from my side, it's a case of having been there and done that and, failed a lot of times and therefore kind of learned a lot off the back of that. And I think in summary, just understanding the importance of flexibility and agility right now for festival organisers, and anything that Paradise can do and kind of plug in on, making sure that part almost doesn't have to be of a concern or worry because they know it's covered, with the right levels of flexibility around that. I think having had the experience and understanding all the kind of complexities and moving parts involved in running such large scale operations, it's proved quite useful, I hope, in shaping how Paradise have kind of put together the support offerings at this time. And just by having, open conversations with various networks and festival organisers and understanding how we as an agency can go above and beyond and not only complement, I guess, what they're doing, but kind of amplify it to the highest of standards possible. But in a way which reduces any kind of risk or stress, because that's obviously the two main things at the moment. That's how I'd say I'm kind of bringing any kind of experience I've had to the AB role.
And it feels like this is the time to push boundaries. It's almost like there's no choice when the ballsy trailblazers might just take the lead in the festival space, as terrifying as the whole situation is. How's the agency supporting its festival clients in pushing those boundaries and taking a new approach? I mean, you've talked a lot about agility. It's important both on a creative but also on the festival side. When it comes to keeping audiences engaged in plans built so much, as we've heard throughout this chat, on shifting sands.
Yeah, I think being able to look at any challenge, and again, I'm aware that this is much easier said than done, but from an agency level, encouraging a strategy that looks at the challenge ahead in a segmented way and then providing a solution quite bespoke per segment is critical. And for me, and if I was in a position of one of our clients who was looking for that support, the most important thing for me is making those solutions digestible and not overcomplicated, so that the organisers have clarity on how best to allocate their resource or their spend. So I guess in short, we've tweaked Paradise's proposition so that everyone can be confident in feeling agile and remaining agile. We've identified, so we kind of looked at every segment that we could support on across strategy, creative, merchandise and production, and then we kind of considered, looked at the barriers to each, whether that be cash flow or committed cost, lead times, risk of cancellations, everything that typically maybe wouldn't normally come into the lens of the creative agency. And then we've tried to simplify the approach for the festivals we're working with, assuring them that they don't need to handhold the agency at the same time as that the team just get it and are flexible and are there to collaborate as if they're an extension of their in-house team.
Just one final question for you, Lou, before I give a final question to everybody. I hate sometimes the notion that the next phase could be one of great opportunity. It just sounds so crass when so many have lost jobs, futures, and so much more than that. And we must always remember that every single day when we're thinking about our current circumstances. But what are you excited about in terms of, you mentioned there, the beyond. Both you and Paul have mentioned that there is a future ahead and it's bright, and we desperately want to get back to it, both within the industry and on the audience side. In terms of creative opportunities for festivals to keep the conversation going with their fans and their loyal audiences, what excites you?
I felt, firstly, in no way dismissing, all the heartache that's going on, that stress, chaos, heartache, and the struggles, that's all real and it's very happening. So absolutely not meaning to be insensitive to that. I think, putting that aside for 1 minute, the projects that we've been working on at Paradise have actually been really engaging and really kind of optimistic and positive to look for that beyond. And they range from like running strategy sessions to help the client see past that mountain of challenge, and to kind of trying to look at I know hibernation is definitely a word that's overused at the moment, but it is looking at how the kind of hibernation period is to be used tactically, and that's been really exciting. Creatively supporting brands to avoid that kind of sea of sameness. I think there's been a sea of sameness across lots of industries purely because people are lacking motivation to, totally understandably, lacking motivation to be innovative. But the projects we've been working on has been encouraging that kind of more intuitive, well-considered content piece. We've been working on reviewing and reshaping some of the psychologies behind visual communication strategies. And I think with the external optic that Paradise as an agency can bring, there is a fresh perspective with a logical and creative lens to help steer through a pretty chaotic time. And the final point I'd say on that is, having worked with Paradise as a client on multiple projects, it's quite clear to me that festivals and everything festivals represent, whether that be celebration, community, shared purpose, etc., it really does form part of the agency's drumbeat, and there's a genuine passion to deliver and push boundaries and have a really good time doing it, to give that motivation and optimism for the future.
Well, we can all get on board with passion and optimism. Those are the two things that I'm really carrying with me. Now, final question. Sadly, we're running out of time, but I have a final question for all of you. And Biff, I'll put this to you first, if you wouldn't mind. I'd love to know, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I can never assume. Do you still have full faith that the UK will continue its long-held and well-deserved reputation as host to some of the world's best festivals?
Yes, without a doubt. I've worked on festivals right across the world, and there's some great festivals out there, don't get me wrong, of all different shapes and sizes, but it's something that we do well in this country. We've got a massive infrastructure built around it, which some other countries don't. We've got access to everything, some of the best stages, actual physical stages in the world. Our production side is world beating, and we've got some of the best sort of production designers that come out of the UK, especially on the dance music side. So yeah, I think we will come back. Hopefully we're going to be back before other countries. I don't mean that in a bad way, but again, it'll give us the chance to sort of lead the charge, I believe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. As you say, it's not about wanting to step on other countries' toes, but if we can lead the charge, then that's awesome. Paul, Sorry, carry on, Biff. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
there is one other thing is that's really going to shape things is
Yeah.
going to be bands and acts coming in from abroad. I think
Yeah.
that's going to have an effect. I mean, we've lost 2 acts at Beautiful Days that we had booked. We've got another act from Bosnia who said that hell and high water, let alone a pandemic, is going to stop them getting there, and I believe they will. But a lot of things with I travelled with the world with Carl Cox for 4 or 5 years. I can't see it getting back to that level of travelling very quickly. I think there's going to be a lot of barriers put in the way, and then that's not even getting into Brexit.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Touring visas and that whole nightmare.
Well,
yeah.
not even so much the touring visas, but I mean, I used to go to IB for probably 2 times a month, 3 times a month during the summer. I can't see that coming back. We're going to be limited on what we can do. So that's going to have an effect. That's going to have an effect definitely on Ibiza, the other holiday destinations, Croatia. I think that's another unknown that we're going to come into after the pandemic's been dealt with. We're going to be suddenly hitting that, and I think the effect has been lost. The effect that's going to have has been lost in the pandemic.
Yeah, I think we are facing, as we keep saying, a new normal, a new landscape. Paul, very quick word from you on having faith that we'll come back strong as the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with Biff. I think in the UK, I think we've got culture defining festivals. I think there's already a renewed appetite out there from audiences for as soon as we can safely return. So I'm not really at all concerned that audiences will come back. I'm not really concerned about it. I think a lot of festivals have cultivated that loyalty or that brand equity or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I think we have to focus on what the next 10 years to 20 years is going to mean for the independent festival sector. In consideration of, most of that sector didn't really exist 30 years ago as well. So we're still a relatively new sector. We're one that was growing pre-pandemic. And I think that we will bounce back, those that can, that can survive this and get to that point. I think there'll be a lot of reflections beyond this. I mean, Biff was talking about transport there and getting back to similar levels. I think a huge conversation as well at the moment within the industry is the climate emergency.
Absolutely.
And that could be a whole podcast in itself, as could the effects of Brexit on touring. So I won't go into either of those issues too much. But yeah, I think it's probably giving people a chance to pause and reflect as to the extent of their footprint. And although there've been a lot of good initiatives in the industry, and we've done a lot of campaigns around, all of our members banning single-use plastics. We've done a big public-facing campaign around audiences taking their tents home. But I think that the live music industry in general needs to address that systemically, and that's yet to happen. But that's a conversation that is happening across the sector at the moment. So I think that'll play into it. But I think, like Biff, it's going to affect things certainly for this year in terms of the restrictions. I mean, we've already seen a few small festivals that operate in particular genres, that rely on international artists, really. They don't have a lineup within that genre for their audience, that they're quite niche, and they're reliant on international artists. And that's played into part of the reason why they've rolled over to next year as well. But I do think for other festivals, perhaps it's not as talent focused, and I think audiences will be accepting of domestic lineups this year. I think people, they know it's an exceptional year, and even if that's a sort of a B lineup, if you like, I think people are just so keen to get out into the fields that won't really matter so much. And we do ultimately have a lot of musical talent here in the UK on our doorstep. Like we're so lucky to have that to be able to tap into for those events that can operate this summer.
Absolutely. Well, I, for one, can't wait for that bounce back and to get back out into those fields. It's the experience that we're all missing. Lou, very quick final word from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity, actually, Paul, to thank you and the team at AIF for the tireless work you guys do to support the industry, because I think it's a huge part of motivation for many at the moment. So I just wanted to reference that.
Oh, thank you, Lou. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I think people in the last year, it's certainly, the support and representation that we've been able to offer, and the membership's grown actually, despite me having absolutely no time to approach anyone about joining. So I think hopefully that speaks for itself. It's I think in general, not just AIF. I think in this sort of situation, people realise the value of trade organisations, and that government only want to speak to one entity. Really, they don't want to talk to lots of different businesses. So I hope we've been able to do that effectively. It feels like the members have been really supportive, they're really engaged. And yeah, I've been running it by myself for the last year actually, so just about to
Have you? Wow.
yeah, just about to hire someone part-time. Yeah, I've been interviewing for that this week, so that'll be a good feeling to expand the team slightly to 1.5 people. But yes, thank you.
Well, that's awesome. And yeah, absolutely second that. But I want to also give you all a massive shout out, because as far as I'm concerned, people who work as hard as you all do are huge heroes, and we wouldn't have a live music industry without any of you. So thank you. A huge thank you to my guests for this Festival Focus episode, Biff Mitchell, Lou Jennings, and Paul Reed. I've been Emma Bartholomew, and I'll be back soon with the next episode of Paradise Talks, where we'll offer some more insider insight on another sector of the creative industries.
To discover more about the agency and Paradise Talks, visit www.paradise.london.